Today we talk to John from Dr. Know-It-All YouTube channel.
John, Dr. Know-It-All, thank you so much for being here. It's great to finally get a chance to talk to you. So we would love to catch up a little bit on the latest AI news and what's been happening. Of course, we had Tesla's Robotaxi rolling out. I think you were one of the first humans on Earth to try it in the wild.
Wow.
I mean, let's start there. How was that?
I'll tell you the story about all of this because it's Tesla and nothing ever goes smoothly. I was actually in Michigan for another event, and several people were like, "Oh, I got the invite," and this is like Friday, and the rollout was Sunday. So a bunch of people said, "Oh, I got the invite," and I asked my wife because she was up there with me, and I said, "Oh man, it's just like, this is insanity." She had surgery yesterday on her knee because she had an ACL thing, and I was like, "This is just too much stress. I'm not going to go. I didn't get an invite. It's okay." And then Saturday at 4:30 in the afternoon, they're like, "Hey, you've got an invite too." And I was like, "Well, I mean, I can't not go now that I have an invite." So I'm sitting here scrambling around trying to make plane arrangements and make sure she gets home from Michigan and all of this stuff. Anyway, so I get to Texas at noon, and the rollout gets pushed back till 2. So fortunately, I'm right there at the beginning. And I go, this is how small of a world it is. There's another content creator named Herbert Ong, Brighter with Herbert. And I went over to a restaurant just to go get some lunch really quick before the things started at 2. Lo and behold, he's live streaming in this restaurant of all these places. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden our phones all ding, and we're all like, and we all are downloading this thing and running out the door trying to get to the car first so that we can be the very first person to be on the Robotaxi ride. So he was definitely in front of me because I have a video of his car and then mine. And so he was like, one car in front of me, but it was,
leave the lattes, no more donuts.
Yeah, I ate half of my lunch and then had to throw it away, and I was really bummed about that. But anyway, so it was, I ended up doing 10 rides across one that day, and then a little bit of the next morning before I had to go back home again. And there were only, I think, maybe 15 of us, but of course we were all giving everybody else rides as much as we could, which was a lot of fun because you could only take one passenger with you at a time. So I'll be happy to talk about the internals of how this all works and the experience, the way that the actual robotics works inside these cars, and they are robots for sure. But the experience of it was very cool. They had a safety monitor, in the passenger seat, who clearly there was some button on the handle that they could kill if they needed to, but none of them in the drives that I did, which were about 90 minutes total, ever touched that button. The car did fantastic, drove around Austin. There was a sort of geofenced area that's kind of like a rectangle below the river that we could drive into, and I would pick like one spot over here, and then I'd pick one at the opposite end, and it would drive us, and then I'd get picked up and I'd go someplace. So I learned a whole bunch about Austin. I had never been to all these cool places, like little coffee shops and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. But the crazy thing was it felt completely normal and fine, which was really cool. And then right after that, I actually took a Waymo. So I actually did a back-to-back Tesla Cybercab or Robotaxi and a Waymo, like within a minute of each other. So we stopped at one place and we actually picked up a Waymo and went to another place. So that was very cool.
Interesting. So out of the two, who would you bet on as kind of winning this race?
I think that Tesla will win on scale as long as they don't screw something up. It's sort of their game to lose at this point. And there's an interesting blog post that Waymo just put out recently. I haven't even had a chance to do a video on it yet, but it talks about how what you need to do is minimize the number of sensors on the vehicles. Everybody who's seen a Waymo, I'm sure it's got the little party hat that's spinning on the top. It's got the little things on the side. It's got, it looks like it's got a bunch of like warts on it or something like that. So it's about $150,000 car, and it's got a ton of different sensors on it. It's got LiDAR, radar, sonar, vision. And so all of those things are expensive, but beyond expensive, they can cause lots and lots of problems. And Tesla had to go through this experience of having things like ultrasonics and radar and stuff on their vehicles. But over time, I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 2021, where they decided to get rid of ultrasonics and radar and just go with vision. And everybody, even till today, everyone's like, "You're crazy. You can't do that." And the answer was always, well, humans have 2 cameras and a neural network, and that's it. And so we can do it. Now, the argument, of course, is that if there's a torrential downpour or a blizzard or something, the cars can't drive in it because they can't see. But it pretty much goes where a human couldn't drive then either, right? And so I don't think it's necessary for a car to drive in a circumstance where a human couldn't drive. Like if it's just like a monsoon flood or something, you just have to stop and wait for 15 minutes until it goes away. And then you can continue. You guys from California, you have no idea. Or just imagine fires. How about that instead? You know, if there's a big fire and there's like a bunch of smoke and you can't see, it's not safe to drive then either. So it's those sorts of circumstances. And I that is a caveat to the way that Tesla's done it with 8 cameras only and no radar or LiDAR or anything like that. But it's, I don't think, a debilitating one. The problem for Waymo is that it's just hard to scale because they have to hyper detail map out any area that these cars drive in, and they have to keep redoing it all the time. If anything changes, the vehicles have to know what the changes are because it's a little bit like a roller coaster, not like fun roller coaster, but the idea that it's on sort of tracks, right? You have LiDAR and the LiDAR says, I am exactly here to the centimeter on this road, and this is the circumstances. And so I can drive down this thing, but if it gets out of those circumstances, it fails. It just doesn't know where to go. And I personally have, I have a Tesla Model Y, which is the same vehicle that the Robotaxis are. And the Model Y, I've taken on dirt roads, gravel roads across a field once. I was in a field and I was like, I knew the road was up there and I was like, well, let's see if this thing could do it. And I engaged the full self-driving and it just drove across the field to the road and then kept going. So these are things that like Waymo just can't do. And plus the fact the vehicle itself is only on the order of $45,000 as opposed to $150,000. And Tesla makes about 5,000 a week of these things. So if this works, right, if it continues to roll out effectively, they're just going to win on scale because there's no way that Waymo is happy if they produce like 500 or 1,000 cars a year. They're like, woohoo, that's great. That's
it does kind of feel like that these systems have 2 different paths. One would be like, it's a business, like you need to like minimize how much money you put into it and you need to get market share. And then slowly you like add all these other things on. But when I think far into the future, it does seem to me that a Tesla of the future or Waymo of the future could have all sorts of sensors like magnetic north and infrared and sound. And it might pick up on these superhuman, like say the car next to you, there's a certain clunk, like something falls off of it and there's a sound detector on your future Tesla, and it can actually use that to help you maneuver around it and become like 1/1 trillionth of a safer car than it was before it had sound. And how do you kind of like reconcile the two, or what do you think like this kind of goes into in the long future?
Right. So the thing that's interesting about, it's true for all of AI in general, but for driving especially, is you're always chasing another 9. There's no way you can be 100% perfect because you can be driving down the road and a meteor comes out of the sky and just crashes into your car. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. So you can, by definition, never get to 100% safety. One quick thing is that Teslas have microphones in them. And so they, I don't know if the version that's in Austin is doing this yet, but they will be able to hear things like sirens or other sounds in the external environment and react to it. So if it's not there yet, it's coming very soon. But anyway, so you're talking about this march of 9s, right? To get to, I was just thinking about this because I did kind of a retrospective thing talking about the Robotaxi in a recent video. And so I was thinking about it. And one of the things I thought about was I was like, look how easy it is to get 10% to 9% of a good driver. That's really, really easy. A high school kid could do it. In fact, my child, when he was in 8th grade, did Lego Mindstorms and he could drive the little robots around, right? So yeah, no problem. To get to 99%, to add one more 9, that is a huge, huge task. And then people think like, oh, 99.9%, well, that's easy. It's like, no, that's a whole other factor of 10 better. So every one of those 9s that you add in terms of safety and reliability is the same amount of effort as it was to go from 9% effective driving to 99%. To do 99.99 is the same to go to 99.99 is, it's just crazy.
Are you in favor of it monitoring the human through the dash cam and actually taking like like if somebody's paying attention or what they're talking about or human psychological signals into account, or would you rather keep that separated?
Well, by definition, I guess I am okay with it because I've allowed Tesla to do that because they have a thing where they look at your eyes while you're driving. Now, supposedly it doesn't leave the car, but it looks at your eyes. And if you you're looking down, looking at your, I have a bad tendency when I'm at a traffic light to just be like, ooh, I'll start like answering my text messages. And it's okay with that. But as soon as the light turns green, it's like, yo, you got to pay attention to the road again. So it already does that. And there are privacy concerns about it, but I don't know until you get a full Robotaxi experience where you're not responsible for the car anymore. I don't know how you avoid that. It seems like it's either that or else jiggle the steering wheel all the time, which is really annoying. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, to me, the whole privacy thing, I'm a lot more relaxed about it if it's mainly read by machines, AIs, image recognition
Right.
models, whatever, versus humans. Because if, then it's a little bit weird, even if you don't know who it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? You never know who's looking at it or whatever. But so, quick question. So, the
Yep.
whole radar versus just like visual sensors, I mean, my understanding is one of the biggest sort of reasons for doing that is there's a lot more video data than there is data on how the radars would function, stuff like that. Every mile that a Tesla drives is one more mile added to its kind of gigantic stores of
Right.
data with visuals and all that stuff. So my question is, so if we're trying to add all these things down the
Right.
road with the sounds and the radar and the whatever other things we can add, you know, is so do you think the idea of just using video for training is going to be the big winner? It's going to just snowball and kind of exponentially grow, or maybe eventually with simulations we can kind of add other sensory stuff as well. Like, what's your take on that?
So when it comes to sensors, vision is definitely has to be the basis of things, right? I think that there's no question roads and life is designed for that. As far as learning from video, actually, this is a really good segue because this can move us into humanoid robot space as well. The way that Tesla does this, and this is from back in 2022, the last time they had a big sort of open meeting, they discussed in great detail how they essentially use Unreal Engine, at least at the time. They would take in this data from human drivers. So let's say there was a weird situation where they caught a car having to squeeze between a UPS truck and a FedEx truck and like tiny little, right? Something, and then a person showed up walking a dog, right? So that's like, just say it was a complicated case because the world is just full of these weird edge cases. And what they could do is they could take that data, they could pull it in and then reproduce a million variants of that inside the Unreal Engine. And the Unreal Engine was good enough that it could fake looking exactly like real video. So it's almost like backwards. They would take the real video out of the car, they would put it inside the game engine and reduce it to the quality of real video again. And so the car had effectively raw input that it thought was real input, but was fake. But they could produce all of these variations of any kind of weird edge case or anything. So it's been a couple of years since they've told us, but I don't know why they would have changed that methodology. It works. I think in terms of like actual, like, YouTube video of, let's say you watched a thing of like, I don't know, how to scramble an egg properly or something, right? You as a human being can do a kind of a coordinate transformation. You can see another person, like third person, either in person or if they had like a person videoing it and they said, hey, watch me. Here's how you stir it. And you use a whisk and all whatever. That kind of a thing humans can do. We can like go like, oh, I see how my arm would do those same motions. That is really, really hard for artificial neural networks to do, but they're getting to that point now. And Tesla's not the only one. Figure has been working on this as well, learning from video. And if they can get that sort of coordinate transformation, learning from video to work well, then the entire internet opens up to them. Because just think about how many YouTube and other videos there are, TikTok videos, all of that kind of stuff about how to do X, Y, or Z. And also it's just much easier. You don't have to have like the POV, because the current way they have to do it is they have to put on a bodysuit with the cameras inside the helmet and do all this stuff as if they're the robot. That's a pain in the butt for humans to do. And there's only so much scaling you can do. Whereas if you can learn from actual video, yeah, then we're talking. Then things get out of control.
Yeah. And what percentage of that training data do you think already comes from simulations versus video on the internet versus, like the hard won people in VR goggles moving stuff around? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what's the breakdown?
Right. I think in terms of like, if you thought about the number of actual repetitions of something, it's got to be the simulation world, because you can spread learning how to stir an egg or whisk an egg across 1,000 GPUs and run it at 1,000 times real time, right? So it's got to obviously be that. And you've got NVIDIA creating these foundation layers like Isaac Gym. I don't know if you know about that, but Isaac Gym is a sort of a physics simulator where you can put your robot in there, and not just your robot, but thousands of your robots in there, and just do the thing over and over again and create these different, just slightly different environments and everything, and change the robot around a little bit. And so I think that's the way that a lot of it, it's doing it through reinforcement learning in these simulated environments. I think the sort of base or finishing touches these days are still done through the goggles and the hands and all that kind of stuff. I've been to a couple of robotics companies where I've seen people doing that, and they can teleoperate it, and the robot can learn from that. And then in terms of learning from third-person video, like YouTube videos and stuff, that's still really, really at the beginning stages. I don't think that we've gotten real far in that, but that's going to be the really big unlock. I mean, it's the same thing as large language models a few years ago, going from like little training sets and stuff to somebody going like, hey, we could scrape the entire internet and have 1 trillion tokens to train on. It's like, oh yeah, holy crap. Like suddenly, you've just leveled up all of this stuff immensely. So if we can move to being able to learn from third-party videos, that's going to be a massive unlock in the robotics space.
What does the economics look like? So it seems to me like right now I have a Tesla and I get an insurance score, and the better I drive, the less I pay. But the more I'm in self-driving, usually the better the score is, because it doesn't tend to like do rolling stops at stop signs like I do. So do you see it basically being like it's just so cheap to let it drive for you, and then if you try to manually take over, you start paying more in insurance, and then people like let go of the steering wheel altogether, and then this becomes something where Tesla becomes more of a UPS or a FedEx, kind of moving packages around when your car is not there. Like, how does this all play out?
Yeah, I like where you're thinking. I mean, for one thing, so you said you have a Tesla yourself, so and a lot of people have Teslas, so which has become a much more fraught situation with the politics of the past year. But anyway, so there's, I don't know, just arbitrarily a couple of million people who own Teslas in the United States. That those are all available, number one, to have full self-driving such as it is turned on right now. And it's not perfect quite yet. You still have to intervene sometimes, but it's getting pretty good. Let's just say magic wand in a year, they actually are good enough that they will enable you to have full self-driving that you don't have to pay attention to anymore. So level 1 consequence of that is that you and I don't know, let's say I have a 20-minute commute to work, and maybe you do. So that's 20 minutes I now recapture that I could either be sleeping, watching stupid YouTube videos, getting work done, answering emails. That's just 20 minutes of actually 40 minutes, because it's both direction. So that's a big chunk of my life that I get back, that I'm not just sitting and staring out at a road. So that's a level 1 consequence. A level 2 consequence is exactly what you're saying. Let's say that now I say like, yes, Tesla, you guys can use this in your fleet while I'm not driving it, because most of the day it's either in my driveway or at work. So yeah, either one of those things we can, you can use the car while I'm not driving it, and you guys can make money and I can make money. That's a great consequence of that, if that works. And so that's a level 2 consequence. And that's how Tesla could scale really quickly. Instead of having to build dedicated cars, they got Teslas all over the US right now. And of course the world itself too. But you go from that, from just Austin, as soon as, like, I live in Athens, Georgia. If Athens, Georgia, say, was the next town, it won't be. But anyway, if it was, all of a sudden you just turn on all these cars, and all these cars are just driving around, and could actually make you as an owner some money as well. And then level 3 is beyond that. You can actually have an Optimus robot, a humanoid robot, say in the passenger or back seat of the car, put a bunch of packages in there for UPS or FedEx or something. And then you drive up to the house, the robot gets out, picks up the package, and puts it on your door. So, that's a 3rd level concept.
Oh my God, you're right.
That gets real. How weird was that going to be? I'm telling you, man, there's going to be a day when I'm going to be walking around. I'll be walking my dogs around the neighborhood, and there's going to be a robot out walking the dog. And then the next thing you know, there'll be a robot UPS driver that's going to be delivering my pack. It's going to be very, very strange.
Man, imagine, just getting in your car, but you get in the passenger seat, and then you've got an Optimus in the driver's seat, not to drive, but just to like get out and go make some money and jump back in. And you're just like, what?
It's like my chauffeur.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of visiting when I was in Austin, this Four Seasons development that they were putting up. And this is way above my pay grade. I couldn't even imagine, doing something like that. But anyway, I was like, oh, I knew that this was special because I got there and like people opened my door for me and stuff. And I was like, ooh. But just imagine if you have your private chauffeur, your Optimus just comes around and opens your door and says, "Come on, sir, it's time for you to go grocery shopping or something." Or
like all those Russian road rage videos that you see on YouTube, except like you hit the Tesla and 3 robots get out and a drone takes off from the roof, and you're like, okay, I back off.
It's like, oh, I'm done. There you go. Oh man,
That's good. Yeah. Was wondering, so in terms of robots, right? So we're seeing a lot more open source stuff, which is, I'm so excited about it.
Right.
And also it seems like it might be a lot more accessible to people who aren't really developers. So we saw, for example, Centex on YouTube got one of those Unitree robots, the EDU edition. And a lot of it is programs. They have a lot of open source libraries. A lot of it is programmed in C++, which is a little bit more of a more complex language, a little bit more difficult versus, something like Python, I think. He knows Python. He doesn't know C++ as well, but he used OpenAI's Codex to be like an in-between. So he's interacting with the code base of this Unitree robot through OpenAI's Codex, which is translating it and doing all the stuff that it needs to do.
Right.
Which I was sitting there, I was like, that's incredible, because that opens up this massive thing for people who are not world-class developers necessarily, that can come in there and train robots to do their thing. What do you think about the whole open source thing? Is there some company that you're very excited about as being maybe the open source champion for robotics?
Oh, for robotics? I actually think if we're going to talk about robotics specifically, Stanford has been very, very amazing with that. Their Aloha robot.
Aloha, yep.
They're not, that's that weird looking thing that looks like a shell because you can stand inside of it. But they have a bunch of open source robotics projects that I'm very excited about. And maybe that's just because I'm in the education space. But what you were talking about actually made me think about what we mentioned before we started recording, which was startup leverage. So all of this stuff kind of feels like this AI leveraging you can do. So yeah, if you don't mind, I'll riff on that. And I have a small company, Artomatic.io, and it's just a couple of us that are working on this thing. And we started the whole thing out of a classroom project in 2020. So I was doing like, hey, can we solve some creative problems in AI? And 2020 is like, it's ancient history. Good Lord. I look back on it now and I was like, man, we were using, generative adversarial networks and things like that, which interestingly enough, Alpha Genome actually uses too, which I thought was really cool. They're using, anyway, they're even older than that, but they're using yeah. So anyway, I can talk about that more, but sorry, side quest, because I got interested in that paper. But anyway, so we started working on this, and there's only so much you could do with just a couple of people. The resources were so limited. So then we had to go get some grants, and that was a lot of extra work. And then you get the grants and you do the work with the grants and you hire a couple of extra people, and there's not enough money, blah, 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 blah. And fast forward to 2025, we're working on a minimum viable product for a new generative AI product that we can just knock out in a matter of a couple of months with just a couple of developers, because AI it's just like it scales the amount you can do by at least 10x. And especially if you're not like the world's greatest programmer or something, which I'm not. My partner actually is a really amazing programmer. I'm just kind of adequate, but it helps me even more than him, because I'm like, oh, hey, OpenAI or Claude or whatever, help me write this thing. And I just remember all the late nights I used to stay up banging my head against the computer screen trying to figure out why one bug didn't work. And now you're just like, hey, what's up with this? And it's like, oh, you forgot to, do this thing or something. And you're like, oh, thanks. No, it saves so much time with that kind of a thing. So I think that AI, the AI, one of the huge kind of potential unlocks, even though it feels like we've kind of hit a little bit of a leveling off right at the moment. And that may be artificial. We may not see that. I famously had a video in the summer of 2022 that I did, infamous, where I said, AI is dead. We're heading towards another AI winter. And in November was ChatGPT, the release. And I was like, oh, could I have been more wrong? So anyway, but that ability to, even if we don't have major foundational changes in the next year or two, I think that just seeing the expansion of people who would not ever have thought of doing a startup before, or being able to create something, a product, whether they're using Codex or whether they're using something like Windsurf or Cursor or Replit or whatever, that it gives people who couldn't have done this before access. We're democratizing the ability to create products, and that is really cool. It's really, really cool.
You know, also, even if you think about some of the models kind of plateauing, just as somebody who covers this every day, I also can find people applying the same level of intelligence to new form factors, right? Like everything in medicine and CRISPR and everything else. So it still feels to me like it's not close to the AI winter. It's more just the implementation phase, and that is growing exponentially, just kind of more vertically.
Yeah.
Or more horizontally instead of vertically.
Yeah. I think that's the problem. It goes back to like an AI thing. It's like explore, exploit, right? Or depth first versus breadth first. I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of a geeky way to put it. But basically, we took this giant step change really 3 years ago with ChatGPT, and we're still exploring a lot of the horizontal space of like, okay, what does this enable us now? Now, yeah, of course, there's been a lot of advances sort of vertically, the way you're thinking at the same time. But just to figure out like, what can we do with this cool new technology that we couldn't do before? That's an amazing step. Cool. Do you want to talk about Alpha Genome just because it's new? It just popped out today.
Let's get on to Alpha Genome. So I do have a few notes. I also haven't had too much of a chance to take a look at it, but if you have, please tell us about it because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I think the kind of big takeaway, and this is hot news today, right? It just came out today. And this is, of course, from Google DeepMind, who, Demis Hassabis has a Nobel Prize in this area for chemistry, created AlphaFold. This is another sort of evolution of that. And it's an enabling technology, it looks like, that allows you to kind of, I think it's 1 million base pairs or something like that. You can input a gigantic chunk of DNA and out pops information about what is going on in it. So if there's a weird, rare genetic disease or something, it can find it and it can go like, these couple of base pairs are what's causing the problem. The really interesting thing about this is apparently, and I'm not super up on this space because medicine is like, it's really hard. It's its own thing. But it apparently what you used to have to do was choose. You could either get a kind of a coarse grained resolution, imagine like very, very low resolution picture of the entire DNA sequence, or you could zoom in and you could enhance, and you could see a little piece of it. And you could see that in high resolution, like, oh, these are individual base pairs going on. It looks like what they've done here is they've allowed you to do both, which is very cool. You can have high resolution and big strings of things coming in. And the really cool part is that it uses convolutional neural networks, which are pretty old school. I mean, that's what AlexNet was back in 2012 that kind of unlocked the whole image recognition thing. It started this whole new ball game. And it also uses transformers. So as far as I understand it, it uses CNNs or convolutional neural networks to look through it. It filters the base pairs and it looks for interesting base pairs that have potentially some sort of problem or something that they might do. And then on top of that, as a second layer, it puts transformers in there. And transformers, of course, are attention mechanism. And so they can go back. So again, this is how it works with like a sentence. You say the cat and it goes back and it looks at the previous words. And then it goes, well, the most probable next word is hat. And so you can use these transformers to go back and look at all 1 million of these things and say, what would be the most logical connector to this? And again, this is outside of my experience. I don't know what would make it look cool to it, but obviously doctors do. And so they've imbued that into these models and they're able to look across these entire giant sequences and go like, oh, this thing, even though it's really, really far away from this thing, they probably have an interaction. And that's new because what you used to have to do is just look at ones that were really close to each other. So you couldn't look at base pairs that were far apart. So that's a big unlock. That's really huge.
Yeah. And just to add one more thing to it too, it's also a little bit different than just the next word prediction, because it's actually anticipating how a mutation is going to impact expression. So there's always been that disconnect between what the DNA is and like what we actually see as a phenotype on the outside of the body. And now it's like, oh, can you predict from there to here? Because that's what we really care about.
Yeah. Yeah. I was using that as an analogy. Yeah. So yes, what it's doing is it's predicting potential diseases, problems, et cetera. And also, interestingly enough, it says that they one of the things that they've unlocked with this is non-expressive gene pairs. So I think like almost like 95 or plus % of the genes of the base pairs in our DNA sequence don't do anything. That well, they're not coding
Yeah,
things.
junk
They're not saying
DNA.
like, yeah, well, but apparently it's not really junk. That's the interesting part. But what they do is they say like, okay, so I've got this instruction that I need to make a skin cell. Now you go down here and look at all these guys. And this is like, oh, here's how I build the protein that makes a skin cell. So I guess that's what all those other ones are doing. And so what this allows you to do is to look at the expressive, the non-coding expression parts of the DNA sequence. So again, I could be wrong. This is very, very fresh stuff. So yeah.
Are you old enough to have ever read one of those like choose your own adventure books?
Oh yeah.
Like where you would go to like page 3 and then decide page 7 or page 15,
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just like that makes a book like infinitely more complicated because you can read it in different orders, and it's like DNA is just riddled with that, and it's super long in the first place. Like such an amazing breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is going to be huge because, I mean, just think of the number of diseases that could be understood, and not just understood, but like, oh, it's this particular sequence or something that's causing the problem. And then obviously this is diagnostic. It won't allow you to fix the problem. But because DeepMind is opening this up to other, faculty, researchers, people like that, hopefully people will then be like, oh, we can do gene therapy on this and use CRISPR or something to fix those base pairs. Because even though they happen to be 100,000 base pairs apart, we can now see that they're connected to each other, which we couldn't see before. And so now we know what to go in and adjust, so that it could lead to some pretty impressive advances in medicine. I hope.
Yeah.
That's always good.
It seems like they're really putting together like a collection of things targeted at improving human health, longevity. So, I mean, we have AlphaFold, they have Alpha Proteo, which is almost like an ability to create custom design proteins that interact with other cells and proteins in the way that we want them to, which is a big breakthrough. Alpha Fold was pretty incredible because it can predict the shapes of these proteins. Then we have this for the DNA. So it seems like between something like this, something like CRISPR, and then various drug discovery, applying this towards drug discovery, it seems like we could see just completely unprecedented new ways of discovering drugs. One of the people from the new Google DeepMind spin-off company, Isomorphic Labs, I believe, that's exactly what they're doing. Mm-hmm. He was on the Sequoia Capital podcast talking about it, saying that it's before how we were designing drugs, it's kind of a crapshoot in a sense that we're just like throwing stuff out there and seeing how it works. And this is completely different because we're able to like simulate what's going to happen before we kind of push it out there. Yeah. What do you guys think about that? I mean, Google DeepMind is, to me, almost, I mean, Google was an exciting company for the search engine, but now it's almost like old news, and this Google DeepMind is creating stuff that seems to be just next level.
Yeah. Google's a really interesting story in general, because if you rewind the clock, I think just even a year ago, everyone was like, oh, they're out of the race. They're not doing anything useful anymore. And I happen to know a couple of folks who work for DeepMind, and they told me, they were like, don't count us out. So like, we got stuff coming down the pipe and it's going to blow people's minds. And I'm like, oh, so now we're seeing it, it's coming out. And I think even their basic, like Gemini Flash, Gemini Pro, those are really impressing people now. Whereas previously, people are like, it's a dog. It's not really working that well. But now they're very much in the game, and in some ways better than anything else. And of course, they also have access to all of YouTube. What a great purchase back in the, what was it, 2012, 2013, when they bought YouTube. I was like, oh, smart purchase, guys.
I would have to bet on them too. It feels like if you go back in time, especially with MS and DeepMind, it did feel like maybe they weren't the product focused company that they needed to be when Sam Altman kind of did the YC on top of AI, OpenAI system. But certainly, I mean, AlphaFold, I think, like 1 and 2, those were predating all of the GPT models, and clearly all this, the Atari game stuff, and just needing to take all of, by the way, they have the only CUDA competitor, right? Like what they do with the TPUs is really, it's like NVIDIA versus Google. It's not NVIDIA versus other companies. So they have infrastructure that they can lean on, and all sorts of things that they just needed to organize their ducks, but you're starting to see them lined up now.
Well, I'll throw out again that attention is all you need, which was what the paper that introduced transformers in 2017 was Google. That was their researchers. So this whole thing
OpenAI wouldn't be there without Google. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, OpenAI was doing cool stuff because they were doing the little RL stuff with the little agents that would run around. I think, Wes, you talk about that a lot, where the little guys would like build the little blockers and like figure out how to jump over the walls and stuff.
The hide and seek, love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's like one of my favorite things still because it's so adorable. And it was really mind blowing when it came out. But that, attention is all you need was Google and OpenAI. Their researchers were like, oh, this is a good idea. We need to run with this. So, Google could have continued with that momentum. I think they lost their focus a little bit for a while, but then it's really seems to have returned in force. And they're also thinking about productizing a lot of this stuff now, as opposed to just throwing away some of the research and not thinking, it's weird. Google doesn't seem like a search engine company, even honestly, to the detriment of a lot of website creators, web content creators. Like when you go on Google now, it's like, here's your little AI generated answer. And that usually works for me. I'm like, yep, okay, that's what I needed. And I don't have to actually go to the website anymore.
I hope some AI near term, like some deep research, starts to find all sorts of like dead ends that have been killed in science that actually shouldn't have been. Like I know the thorium reactor, which China's now starting up again, was just American knowledge just dropped in the 70s. And like how many things like that have we been so close to but just misguessed on?
Yeah, I just watched a video on that, and I didn't even realize they said basically that all the research was there in the 70s, and the U.S. just dropped it because it didn't produce fissile material that we wanted for nuclear weapons. And so we're like, we don't want that. But now China's just basically took it. They took all this stuff, and they actually have in the Gobi Desert, they have a thorium reactor working now. So pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's probably some 80-year-old out there that's like, see, I had the solution to electricity.
like,
you guys didn't even look, why don't you guys believe me?
There was actually one of the contentions is that our energy problem would have pretty much been solved if thorium reactors, because that was 50 years ago. So, 5 decades is a long time to develop stuff. And these can be done in pretty small. They don't have to be those gigantic things that you have like the uranium nuclear reactors. So
interesting. What do you guys think about so Sam Altman in his Gentle Singularity blog post were saying that we're seeing kind of the larval stages of recursive self-improvement. And of course, we've seen a lot of stuff like the Darwin-Gödel machine. We've seen the Alpha Evolve. I just saw a recent paper they've applied kind of the same thing to a self-improving agent that's playing Settlers of Catan. So we're seeing more and more examples. NVIDIA had a number of things like Voyager and Eureka that showed it early on of GPT-4. It was able to kind of self-improve. I mean, that's kind of like where a lot of people think we might see the intelligence explosion. And, what's his name? Aschenbrenner, said 2027. That's where we're going to see that kind of vertical takeoff. What do you think about that? Is that still science fiction or is it becoming more realistic?
So one of my, by the way, I loved your Settlers of Catan video. I watched that and I was like,
thank you.
I was like, thank you. But one of the things that I worked on, I went back and my master's in AI is actually from the mid 2010s because I had gotten a PhD. I was teaching at the University of Georgia and my kids had gotten old enough that I was like, I'm bored now. So let me go to school, which was a stupid idea. I was like, I'm old. That was hard. So anyway, but I went back and I got this degree. But the things that fascinated me at the time were genetic evolution, which is basically modeling human evolution inside of AI. And neural networks. And at the time, you just didn't have the kind of compute or algorithm to combine those. You could either do genetic algorithms, which were relatively simple AI that you could evolve, or you could do neural networks. And so my master's thesis is on neural networks. But I always loved the genetic algorithms and stuff. And I was like, man, someday we'll combine these two things together. And now it's happening. And I'm like, yeah, it's a massive amount of work to do that because, of course, it has to be able to, you have to create a population of different potential models. And then those will have to compete with each other. And then you have to figure out which one's the best. And then the part that I don't think anybody's quite figured out yet, this is the sexual reproduction part. So the simulated sexual reproduction part. And I'm not talking about some sort of websites and things. I'm just saying like what you have to do is you have to take, let's say you have two highly competent models. How do you combine them into something that's a child model that combines the best of both of them, or at least potentially does, right? I mean, that's the whole point of evolution. It's like, well, let's throw them together and see what happens. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that sort of reproduction thing is an interesting open problem as far as I understand it. But the evolution is cool. That's going to lead to very rapid takeoff. Yeah.
What do you know about the solutions? Because that's a good question, because you can't just combine the weights, right? Or, I mean, if they have the
Right.
same amount of parameters, can you? Or do you just have to start a third model and randomize the weights and then have the other two generate content and it learns from scratch? Like, how do you
Yeah.
combine, or what are the paths?
The Gödel Escher machine does that, but it actually starts with a population of one and then creates descendants out of it. But it doesn't, it kind of just creates these descendants, but it doesn't really blend multiple models. It sort of just takes one and adjusts it. I would say the easiest thing in my mind would be to adjust the hyperparameters, which are things like the learning rate. There's a whole bunch of like parameters outside of the sort of spreadsheet of all the numbers that you actually use that help you to train better. And sometimes a lot of those numbers. And what you could do is evolve those numbers. You could say like, well, if I turn the learning rate to 0.001 at this point, and what does that do? Does that make it train better or worse or something? And so then you can train it, and you can see whether it's better or worse than the other one. And then you can take the highest performing, members of that population. And you do that for 100 different hyperparameters, and you could actually start to evolve something. But I don't know. I mean, maybe what you do is you actually think about it kind of like genes. If you think about, like, let's say, a mixture of experts, and this would be a good possibility. So a mixture of experts, you have a kind of a conductor or orchestrator thing that goes like, oh, this is a math question. Here, math expert, you go take care of this. So that's, if you have a 10 billion parameter model, it might only be 1 billion parameters. That's the math expert. So what you could do is you could just be like, well, let's give it some math questions and only evolve the math expert in this particular version. And with that, maybe you could just actually kind of take out weights and kind of randomly shift them around. I don't know how you do that in a way that's going to be efficient, because the big problem with this is it's so time consuming and so compute intensive to do it. But if you could get that to work, damn, that would be amazing.
There might have been, I'm curious what you think about this, because there's a few papers just very, very recently. And I talked to Joe from the SVIC podcast. He was a ex-Google director of engineering. So he actually sent it to me. And I was like, one of those papers where you open it up and it's got a lot more math than I was like, oh boy, okay, here we go. There goes my day. I got to go through this. But
Yeah.
it was fascinating because he sent me a couple of different ones. One of them was the self-adapting models or something along those lines, where basically changed its own weights.
Right.
And then the author of one of the authors on the paper on the X goes, by the way, kind of the future application of this is to create a teacher model, right? That is able to then create those models and adjust their weights to kind of create on the fly, and also tune the hyperparameters and all of that stuff. So how does that combine with what you're talking about, where it's evolution of models versus like maybe a teacher model creating those models? Do they go hand in hand? Is it two different approaches that are not, can't go together?
So the reason why all of this evolution takes so long is because if you really want to do this right, you have to, so let's say, let's take a small model. Let's say a training run could take you 10 days on 100 GPUs, right? Again, it's just throwing out numbers, but it's not nothing. It's not a couple of seconds. It's a long period of time. Now, let's say you have to generate 100 of these for a population and train all 100 and then test them. So suddenly you've got 100 days plus maybe 30 more days to test them all. And then you pick out the next generation. Like right now, that's just prohibitively expensive to do. So, and I don't mean that even if you have all the money in the world, it's just time-wise prohibitively expensive to do. So I think what you're talking about, and it was very interesting. Was it your video? I might have been listening to at the gym this morning about giving feedback, training a teacher model to be better instead of the student models. So
yes, yeah. So there's two papers. Like my recent one was on that. It's a different paper, but yes, yeah.
But so I think that those are very cool possibilities, because that you kind of combine that. You could do some basic evolution and then create like maybe a relatively simple model that then you can have a teacher model that trains that model, hopefully gets it better. The teacher model can be, evaluated on how well the students do. This is where you can use that population. Because if you're a teacher, let's say you have 30 kids in your classroom, right? You're going to have kids who are performing well and poorly, but you're responsible for moving the bell curve to the right to make sure that all your students generally do better. And so then you could use this population of students that are perhaps relatively simple model, and you train one teacher model to get better and better and better at teaching these other models. And then you produce another generation of students that are better. So that way you could kind of combine all of these thoughts together, and that gets really fun and interesting.
It is wild. Like when you think about the scale biology is working on with about 37 trillion cells in all of us, and each one's an entire copy of the genome, and then, 8 billion humans, and the amount of mixing that can happen through the procreation. It's just like, to have that many models is just like beyond the compute we could ever imagine right now.
Right.
But I mean, eventually, but it's definitely far off.
Yeah, and I think that's why they're thinking that the teacher models might be less compute intensive, because instead of doing a million or a billion different variations, we just train them and we use that as reinforcement learning feedback to the teacher model. Like if you made a better model, high five. If not, then but what you know what I mean? Like kind of the
You're
basic
fired.
You're fired, yeah. But we use that as signals for them to improve for reinforcement learning. But what does that say about alignment and AI safety? I mean, we're kind of offloading more and more of our AI development to AI.
Yeah, and what's your PDoom?
Yeah,
both questions.
That's the only thing that matters. Nobody talks about that anymore. Like everyone used to say, "What's your PDoom?" and now it's not even a thing. I think people have weirdly come to accept it a little fatalistically. Yeah. The problem is that I feel like we're one more step away architecturally. We need one more thing like transformers that's like one better than that. And then we're going to hit intelligence in these things that is demonstrably smarter than humans already. I mean, holy crap. You look at these things on like an Amy and the MMLU and things like that. It's like, it does better than I would. I couldn't do that well on these tests. It's like, that's crazy. So yeah, it's already like arguably as good as humans, but it's also really stupid sometimes. But if we can just get sort of like one more step change, like ChatGPT was, then I think we're going to get to a spot where there's no longer an argument about whether humans or silicon are smarter. Just think about that. This is like this is a rock and it's thinking. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's sand. It's weird that sand is sitting there thinking. I guess we're carbon molecules, so whatever, but.
Right. Yeah. I guess depends what normal is, right? So to speak.
Exactly.
One of the things they talk about is like this idea of sample efficiency. So it's like, how many examples do you need before you get it? And, neural networks seem to be much less efficient than humans. I saw Noam Brown, he worked on Cicero at Meta. Now he's at OpenAI working on their multi-agent frameworks. And so he's saying like, you can design a Texas Hold'em, poker playing robot that will just destroy human experts. But against like the bad players, it's not going to do as well as a good player would. Because a good player is going to notice, okay, that's a fish, that's somebody that's not going to play very well and just abuse that. That model is not going to catch on to that as fast. So it's like superhuman this way, but because of the kind of not efficient, it's not sample efficient. It's not as fast as humans picking up on stuff like that.
Right.
Do you have any intuition about why that is, or is that how do we solve that?
This circles us back to the beginning of our conversation, which is like robotaxis and humanoid robots, that the real world is an incredibly efficient teacher. And I mean that for us individuals, because I know you've conked your head or broken your finger, you learn real fast not to do things or stick your hand on the stove. But also for genetic populations, it's like, oh, that was a bad idea to make somebody's nose so big they couldn't drink water anymore or something, right? It's like, you're done. That's it. So I think that the problem with these large language models in general is that they're just living in this little box of words and pictures, whereas real robots that are out in the real world, and we've only really seen, cars are kind of the forefront of this, the forerunner, but we're going to see humanoid ones soon. But when you fall down and your arm breaks off or something, that's a pretty good reinforcement lesson. And so that's the kind of thing where I think that Jan LeCun says, I don't think he did this research, but he has reported it, that a child by the time they're 4 years old, so, 365 days times 4, has acquired as many bits of information into their system as all of the human information in writing that we've ever created ever. So, right, on the order of 12 trillion tokens or something along those lines. So he's saying, look how much information you take in as a person. So reality is just so much better. So I think that's where we can really get some advancement. If we can have these machines interact with reality in a more, whether it's simulation or real reality, but I think that's where we actually get that very, very fast acceleration of intelligence.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add to that, it's actually something, Wes, that during our first interview, you kind of got me thinking about, is that I have to expand my definitions of intelligence like immensely, because every time I look at the biological world, there just was biological constraints, the type of food or the type of environment or the way biology is all connected through like one long history. I mean, when we build something on a silicon chip, it's invented not through evolution that comes from 4.5 billion years ago in a long chain. It can be very different. So I just have to imagine other types of intelligence and say, wow, you're beyond me in some ways and maybe not like me in other ways, but that does not mean you're incapable.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that to me, this is what we talked about in our first interview. I mean, the thing that really blew my mind is when it started AlphaFold understanding what it's doing, because we had this collection of 150,000 proteins that we meticulously figured out what the structure was. We feed it into this neural network, and it's impossible to calculate those things because of how complex they are. So it's like one of those IQ tests where you see like image and then another image, and you're supposed to figure out what the third image, like what the pattern is. It saw some pattern that we can't even begin to comprehend. It's so beyond anything that we can do with our brains or computers. And it's like, okay, so this is like some intelligence that just completely different. Like it's just not even close to us. And how many more things like that are we going to find where it's like just able to reason about things that we can't even begin to approximate?
You see like a fly just bouncing into a window over and over again, and you're like, well, I have this whole concept of like how light goes through those kind of materials, and you're missing it. And then I have to think AI is going to look at the same thing and just be like, wow, you can't just look at a piece of DNA and see how it's going to make a protein that will fold together into a certain shape. Like, God, that's obvious. Sad, you know, like, yeah.
Dylan Curious channel has part 2 of this interview available now. Check it out.